You're being judged right now, every day, every interaction, every word you speak, every post you share, and the verdict is always the same. Do you deserve respect or contempt? You feel it, don't you? That invisible current running beneath every social interaction. The subtle hierarchy that determines who speaks and who listens, who leads and who follows, who matters and who doesn't. You've been told that authenticity wins respect, that vulnerability earns admiration, that transparency builds trust. What if I told you that's the greatest lie of our age? What if the very behaviors you've been taught will earn you respect are precisely what's destroying it? Niccolo Machiavelli understood this 500 years ago. Behind the caricature of the cutthroat political philosopher lies a profound psychological insight that most people never grasp. An uncomfortable truth about human nature that explains why the most authentic people often command the least respect, why the most honest leaders frequently wield the least power, why your genuine attempts to connect may be precisely what's undermining your social standing. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. These words from Machiavelli's masterpiece, The Prince, contain a psychological revelation that most modern self-help gurus are too afraid to acknowledge. The path to respect isn't paved with endless self-disclosure. It's not found in emotional transparency. And it certainly doesn't come from showing the world your every weakness, doubt, and insecurity. The real playbook for earning deep, genuine respect looks nothing like what you've been told. It requires understanding the uncomfortable gap between how humans claim to assign respect and how they actually do. Today, we're going to decode Machiavelli's actual insights, not the simplified cartoon version you've heard, but his profound understanding of human psychology. We'll explore why certain behaviors consistently destroy respect, regardless of how authentic or well-intentioned they might be. This isn't about manipulation. It's about liberation from the social programming that keeps you trapped in patterns that undermine your standing in every relationship, workplace, and community you enter. Are you ready to see what's really happening beneath the surface of every human interaction? To understand Machiavelli's real insights about respect, we need to first dispel the caricature that's persisted for centuries. Machiavelli wasn't simply advocating ruthless power-grabbing or unprincipled deception. He was doing something far more profound, observing humans as they actually behave, not as they pretend to behave. Born in 1469 in Renaissance Florence, Machiavelli served as a diplomat and political advisor, giving him an unfiltered view of how power and respect actually functioned in the real world. His most famous work, The Prince, was revolutionary not because it advocated immorality, but because it dared to describe the uncomfortable gap between our idealized self-image and our actual behavior. The core of Machiavelli's insight can be distilled to this: humans respond to what they perceive, not what is. Our brains are not designed to process complete reality, but to create useful interpretations of it. This means that the perception of your worth determines your social position far more than your actual worth. Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, Machiavelli wrote, because it belongs to everybody to see you, to few to come in touch with you. In modern terms, people form judgments based on limited information, filling in the gaps with assumptions and biases. The image you project reaches everyone. Your inner reality reaches almost no one. This isn't cynicism, it's psychological realism. Cognitive science now confirms what Machiavelli intuited through observation. Humans make snap judgments based on incomplete information, then selectively attend to evidence that confirms those initial impressions. The fundamental Machiavellian insight about respect is this: it's not primarily earned through moral virtue or authentic self-expression, but through the strategic management of how others perceive your competence and power. Let's translate this into modern psychological terms. Respect emerges from the perception of two key qualities: competence and warmth. Competence without warmth creates fear, not respect. Warmth without competence creates affection, but not respect. True respect requires both, but competence must come first. This is where modern advice goes catastrophically wrong. We're told to lead with vulnerability, to share our struggles, to be authentic by revealing our weaknesses. Machiavelli would recognize this as socially suicidal. When you lead with vulnerability before establishing competence, you don't create respect, you destroy it. A prince must imitate the fox and the lion, for the lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. This famous quote isn't advocating deception. It's acknowledging the necessity of strategic self-presentation in a world where perception shapes reality. The fox represents intelligence and the ability to read social situations accurately. The lion represents courage and the capacity for decisive action. Together, they form the foundation of earned respect, perceived competence in navigating both social complexity and direct challenges. Machiavelli identified several key principles that govern how respect is actually earned and maintained. First, the principle of scarcity. Men value possessions in proportion to their cost. What's freely given is undervalued. This applies not just to material goods, but to your time, attention, and personal disclosures. When you make yourself constantly available, when you overshare without discretion, you inadvertently signal low value. Respect diminishes accordingly. Second, the principle of consistency. Nothing makes a prince so much esteemed as great enterprises and setting a fine example. Your actions must align with your words, and both must project a coherent image of who you are. Inconsistency creates cognitive dissonance, which the human mind resolves by assigning you lower status and respect. Third, the principle of controlled revelation. The vulgar crowd always is taken by appearances, and the world consists chiefly of the vulgar. This isn't elitism. It's the recognition that most social judgment occurs at the surface level. Strategic revelation, choosing what to display and what to withhold, isn't dishonesty. It's acknowledging the limitations of human perception. Fourth, the principle of emotional regulation. Men are less hesitant about harming someone who makes himself loved than one who makes himself feared. Machiavelli observed that unregulated emotional display signals vulnerability, which historically invited exploitation. Modern neuroscience confirms that displays of unchecked emotion activate dominance responses in observers. Perhaps most importantly, Machiavelli understood the principle of power attribution. Humans instinctively respect those who appear to have control over outcomes. When you constantly explain, justify, or apologize, you signal a lack of agency, even when your intentions are honorable. This triggers an unconscious reduction in the respect others assign you. These principles reveal a profound truth that contradicts modern conventional wisdom. Excessive transparency about your insecurities, struggles, and weaknesses doesn't humanize you in a way that builds respect. Instead, it provides others with a cognitive map of exactly how to diminish you. This doesn't mean Machiavelli advocated deception. Rather, he recognized that selective self-presentation isn't manipulation. It's a necessary adaptation to how human perception actually works. In a world of limited information, the signals you choose to send determine how you're evaluated. Men are so simple and so subject to present necessities that he who seeks to deceive will always find someone who will allow himself to be deceived. This isn't celebrating deception. It's warning that humans are predisposed to believe convenient narratives. When you project weakness, others will conveniently accept that narrative, even when it doesn't reflect your full capability. The Machiavellian approach to earning respect isn't about false fronts or pretending to be something you're not. It's about strategic authenticity, the thoughtful decision about which aspects of your authentic self to reveal in which contexts. Think of it as the difference between transparency and translucency. Transparency means everything is visible. Translucency means allowing light to pass through selectively. One leaves you exposed, the other allows you to direct focus where it serves your purpose. Modern psychology validates this approach. Studies on leadership perception consistently show that premature vulnerability undermines authority, while strategic revelation of selected vulnerabilities after competence is established actually enhances it. The key Machiavellian insight for our age might be this: in a culture that celebrates unfiltered authenticity, the thoughtful curation of your self-presentation is not just advisable. It's essential for earning the respect that allows your authentic contributions to be valued. Let's examine how Machiavelli's principles manifest in modern life, revealing why certain common behaviors systematically destroy respect, regardless of good intentions. Consider workplace dynamics. Have you noticed how the colleague who constantly apologizes, even for minor issues not their fault, gradually loses influence? This illustrates Machiavelli's principle of power attribution. Excessive apology signals a willingness to absorb blame, which others unconsciously interpret as an admission of incompetence or weakness. A revealing study from leadership psychology found that leaders who apologized for factors beyond their control, like external market conditions, were rated significantly lower on competence than those who acknowledged challenges without assuming personal blame. The respect-preserving alternative isn't arrogance. It's acknowledging situations without automatically assuming responsibility for them. Social media provides a laboratory for observing Machiavellian principles in action. The phenomenon of oversharing demonstrates the principle of scarcity in real time. Individuals who document every emotion, conflict, and personal struggle find their content progressively devalued, regardless of how authentic it may be. A controversial but revealing study of social media influence showed that accounts maintaining strategic mystery, revealing personal information selectively rather than constantly, maintained follower engagement up to 3 times longer than those practicing radical transparency. The human mind values what it must work to obtain, including information about others. The professional who posts about every career setback, financial struggle, or moment of self-doubt isn't building authentic connection. They're inadvertently creating a perception pattern that becomes increasingly difficult to overcome. As Machiavelli noted, men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand. Once a perception solidifies, subsequent information is filtered to confirm it. Consider how this plays out in romantic relationships. The partner who makes themselves perpetually available, who responds instantly to every message, who clears their schedule at a moment's notice, is applying the opposite of Machiavelli's scarcity principle. Rather than building appreciation, this behavior often triggers devaluation. Relationship psychologists have documented what they call the paradox of appreciation, where partners who occasionally create healthy space receive greater appreciation than those who are constantly accessible. This isn't manipulation. It's respecting the psychological reality that humans value what isn't automatically available. Perhaps the most striking modern application of Machiavellian insight appears in leadership contexts. Consider 2 managers. One regularly expresses doubts about decisions, shares anxieties about outcomes, and publicly processes uncertainties. The other acknowledges challenges but projects confidence, reserves doubts for appropriate private settings, and presents decisions with conviction. Research on leadership perception consistently shows that the second approach commands significantly more respect and compliance. This isn't because humans prefer arrogance or false certainty. It's because the brain processes displays of uncertainty as signals about competence and status. As Machiavelli observed, humans respond primarily to what they perceive, not what is. The manager who believes they're building trust through radical transparency is often undermining the very respect needed for their ideas to be implemented. This isn't fair or rational, but it's how human perception operates. A particularly controversial application appears in crisis communication. Studies of public response to emergency management show that leaders who project calm confidence during crises, even while privately acknowledging uncertainty, generate better compliance with safety measures than those who publicly share their full range of concerns and uncertainties. The Machiavellian insight here isn't about deception, but about understanding that certain contexts require prioritizing effective outcomes over expressive authenticity. In negotiation scenarios, the principle of controlled revelation proves decisive. The negotiator who eagerly explains their reasoning, limitations, and fallback positions consistently achieves worse outcomes than one who strategically manages information disclosure. This applies whether negotiating salary, business deals, or household responsibilities. A study of salary negotiations found that candidates who explained their reasons for requesting higher compensation received significantly lower offers than those who simply stated their requirements without elaborate justification. The act of explaining was unconsciously interpreted as a signal of lower status and confidence. Even in friendship, Machiavellian principles apply. The friend who immediately shares every thought, who has no filter between impulse and expression, who makes themselves constantly available regardless of how they're treated, this person typically finds themselves respected less over time, not more. Psychological research on friendship maintenance confirms that relationships with appropriate boundaries, where disclosure is reciprocal rather than one-sided, where accessibility has limits, last longer and report higher mutual satisfaction than those characterized by unbalanced transparency. The pattern becomes clear. Behaviors we associate with openness, authenticity, and good intentions often systematically undermine respect. This isn't because respect requires manipulation, but because human perception operates according to principles that don't align with our idealized self-image. A particularly troubling example appears in advocacy contexts. Studies of persuasion show that advocates who present their position with strategic restraint, who appear unmoved by opposition, who maintain emotional regulation during attacks, these individuals gain greater traction than those who respond to every criticism, who display their full emotional investment, or who attempt to address every counter-argument. This explains the counterintuitive finding that the most passionate advocates for causes often become their least effective representatives. Their very authenticity triggers psychological resistance in those they hope to persuade. Even in parenting, Machiavellian insights prove relevant. Research on parental authority shows that parents who maintain appropriate mystique, who don't process all their uncertainties aloud, who present a consistent front even during internal doubt, create greater security and compliance in children than those practicing radical transparency about their every concern and limitation. These examples reveal an uncomfortable truth. The very behaviors we're told will build authentic relationships often systematically undermine respect. Not because respect requires deception, but because human perception operates according to principles that Machiavelli identified 5 centuries ago. Principles our modern celebration of unfiltered authenticity refuses to acknowledge. We've ventured into uncomfortable territory. We've confronted the gap between how we wish human respect worked and how it actually functions. We've seen how behaviors celebrated as virtuous, radical transparency, unfiltered authenticity, constant availability, often systematically undermine the very respect they're intended to build. This knowledge places you at a crossroads. You could reject these insights as too calculating, too strategic, too Machiavellian in the caricatured sense. You could continue believing that showing your every vulnerability, processing your every uncertainty aloud, and making yourself endlessly available will somehow earn you the respect you deserve. Or you could embrace the liberation that comes with seeing social dynamics as they actually operate, rather than how we pretend they do. This isn't about becoming manipulative. It's about recognizing that strategic self-presentation isn't deception. It's an acknowledgement of how human perception actually works. It's understanding that respect isn't primarily earned through moral virtue or authentic self-expression, but through the thoughtful management of how others perceive your competence and power. Machiavelli's real legacy isn't teaching manipulation. It's the courage to see human nature without illusion, to recognize that respect flows from perception, and perception is shaped by the signals you choose to send. The path forward isn't adopting a false persona. It's practicing strategic authenticity, making conscious choices about which aspects of your authentic self to reveal in which contexts. It's understanding that translucency serves you better than transparency, that selective revelation creates more impact than indiscriminate disclosure. Start by auditing your communication patterns. Where are you over-explaining? Where are you apologizing unnecessarily? Where are you making yourself too available? Where are you sharing vulnerabilities before establishing competence? Observe the people in your life who command genuine respect, not mere popularity or likability, but true respect. Notice how they manage the perception of their competence, how they regulate emotional display, how they create appropriate scarcity of their time and attention, how they reveal vulnerability strategically rather than indiscriminately. Practice the discipline of silence. Not every thought requires expression. Not every emotion demands external processing. Not every criticism merits response. As Machiavelli understood, power often lies in what you choose not to say. Cultivate the art of measured response. When others escalate emotionally, respond with calm intensity. When they rush, proceed with deliberate pace. When they overshare, listen without reciprocating. These contrasts create perception patterns that automatically generate respect. Recognize that your need for validation may be sabotaging your quest for respect. The impulse to explain, justify, and seek approval signals lower status to the observing brain. True respect comes not from being understood, but from being perceived as someone worth understanding. Implement the principle of controlled revelation. Share personal information proportionally to established trust, not as an attempt to fast-track intimacy. Authentic connection emerges from mutual discovery over time, not from premature disclosure. This isn't dark manipulation. It's aligning your behavior with how human psychology actually functions, rather than how we pretend it does. It's recognizing that the path to genuine respect requires understanding the gap between how humans claim to assign respect and how they actually do. The most radical form of authenticity isn't unfiltered self-expression. It's the courage to see reality as it is, including the uncomfortable mechanics of how respect is earned and maintained. True freedom comes not from ignoring these principles, but from understanding them well enough to work with them, rather than against them. As Machiavelli himself wrote, "A wise man ought always to follow the paths beaten by great men and to imitate those who have been supreme." The truly wise don't pretend social dynamics work according to idealistic narratives. They observe how respect actually flows and align their behavior accordingly. The choice is yours. Continue believing that unfiltered authenticity will somehow overcome the psychological principles that govern human perception. Or embrace the liberation that comes with seeing the social world as it actually operates. If you want respect, genuine, lasting respect that allows your voice to be heard and your contributions to matter, stop undermining yourself with behaviors that feel virtuous but systematically diminish your standing. Stop over-explaining. Stop unnecessary apologizing. Stop constant availability. Stop premature vulnerability. Start managing the perception of your competence with the same care you bring to developing that competence. This isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming a more effective version of who you already are. It's about ensuring that your authentic value is perceived accurately rather than diminished by psychological patterns you've been taught to ignore. The time has come to see beyond the comfortable illusions about how respect is earned, to recognize that strategic self-presentation isn't manipulation. It's the prerequisite for your authentic contributions to be valued. Machiavelli's final gift isn't teaching you to deceive, but showing you how to be perceived as you truly deserve to be. Not through manipulation, but through the courage to see social reality without illusion. The real playbook for earning respect has been waiting for you for 5 centuries. The question is, are you ready to use it?